The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
Welcome to the end of 2022, which I'm pretty sure some people are pretty happy about. Yeah, I don't know. 2022 is an interesting year for me. Welcome to another episode of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author. Once again, if you can make your New Year's resolution to follow us on social media, that would be amazing. Don't forget, it's Florida Beer Blog on Instagram and Twitter. FL Beer Blog on Facebook. You can find us on the interwebs at FloridaBeerBlog.com, FloridaBeerPodcast.com, and FloridaPodcastNetwork.com, because we are a proud member of the Florida Podcast Network, an amazing collection of podcasts here in the Sunshine State. If you want to reach out to us, obviously we're FloridaBeerBlog@gmail.com. And if you are listening to us on the podcasting app of your choice, obviously, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to like us and subscribe. And if you can, leave us a nice big 5-star review to let everybody know that they should be listening just like you did today. So today is going to be part one of a 2-part series with Dave Lester. He is the head brewer at Unseen Creatures, just off Bird Road in Miami. It is kind of the wildest tap room I've ever seen. Not because it is an awesome tap room. They've got a great facility, but it is one pane of glass and a concrete divider away from the exit off of the Dolphin Expressway, I do believe that is. And I know that we spoke about it during the interview. It is amazing how close you get to those vehicles. I'll probably post some pictures up on Instagram if I can remember to do it. It is just, it's kind of amazing. But that has absolutely nothing to do with how amazing the beers are there as well. And not only the beers, but they have a very distinctive visual style. And if you've seen their beers, the cans, if you've seen what they release, you will definitely know what I'm talking about. It was originally created by Marco Le Vidal. He is no longer with the organization, as I found out from Dave. So I'm actually going to be chatting with him about his initial experiences with the Miami-Dade brewing community and Unseen Creatures in and of itself, the places that he went to, kind of coming back to Unseen Creatures and continuing on. It is a good conversation. I was actually very happy with how this one turned out. We do start a little bit when it comes to, talking about some other beers, especially Guinness. But there's just a lot of great stuff, and it was fantastic to sit there and listen to him. So we are in Miami with Dave Lester at Unseen Creatures Brewing and Blending. Enjoy. They actually have street teams that go around to all the pubs to test
the Guinness. To make sure it's good.
Yes,
they have really good pours of Guinness at Universal in Orlando too.
Really interesting.
If you just get a Guinness, if you're at Harry Potter Land and go get a Guinness, I think they have some deal with the company where they get like everybody trained by Guinness, where like people do the correct pours and they just have really good pours there. Clean draft lines.
Well, it's funny with the Guinness tour in Dublin. First of all, they signed like a 1,000-year lease. Arthur Guinness did.
That's crazy.
So in the rotunda, in the ground, behind like 2 inches of bulletproof glass, is that lease, with Arthur Guinness's signature on it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but with your ticket, you get 1 beer.
Yeah.
And you can either go up to the bar at the top, where it's like 360-degree view of Dublin, and get your beer there.
Yeah.
or they've got a pouring experience where they teach you step by step how to pour the Guinness from a nitro tap. And
the proper process.
Yeah.
I think that's clever marketing on their part, having where you have to pour it correctly for it to be a correct pour of Guinness. Where if you don't have the right glassware, it's not a correct Guinness pour.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because the correct glassware, it's got the harp.
Yeah.
And when you pour
put the nozzle
beer,
at the part,
you aim for the harp. Who else did something?
There's a bar I used to work at where we did a Pepsi challenge with people, kind of, where we were doing improperly poured Guinnesses compared to properly poured Guinnesses.
Could people tell?
Nobody could tell. Nobody could tell. No, not even like there was a guy who was like, he was a Cicerone back before I knew Cicerones were a thing. He was like on the tip of the spear of the Cicerone brigade, and he couldn't tell.
That's funny.
But
that is funny.
But it's clever, and it makes people patient, waiting.
Yes.
They'll wait and let it while it cascades and precipitates or whatever. People know it's part of the process, so they're a little more patient when they order Guinness. They're like, "Oh, it takes 10 minutes. That's fine. I'm okay with that."
I will say, I love watching it.
Yeah,
just watching a nitro pint cascade down is a
nice.
thing of beauty.
It's very.
Who had the whole? You have to use our glass. There's a whole ceremony. They had a knife.
Stella.
Thank you.
Stella. They had the knife on top of the foam and all that. Yeah.
It's like, it's such a crap
beer. They tried to do the same shit as Guinness and it didn't work. It's just fucking Stella.
Stella's such a,
Belgian Budweiser.
That's literally what it is. And it was funny because I was over there where we were talking about Heineken and how nobody over there drinks.
No.
Nobody in
Europe drinks Heineken. Amsterdam is pretty good though.
It described us like, they came over here, saw everybody was drinking Heineken. They were like, "Why are you drinking our old man's beer?"
Yeah, it doesn't taste the same over here either. But I like an old Heineken with a little bit of the green bottle skunk.
Okay,
a little bit of that funk to it. I like that. I like a little bit of that. Bottle conditioning, right? Of a lager. Peronis get that too. You get a little bit of that like bottle skunk. Love it. You can't replicate that. There's no way I can do that in a brewery. That's just the terroir of a truck.
Well, you can. You can just take a big
UV lights and
UV lights. Or I was going to say, take a big plastic container of the beer, just let it sit out in the parking lot for a couple days.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. I've seen setups before where they cycle the beer through a pump with a bunch of sight glasses and have UV lights on the sight glasses. And just leave it for a day where it's just running the beer through UV lights. But that's something that the trial and error involved in figuring out how long it takes to do it and monitoring that is, it's not the kind of thing you want to overdo.
No, not at all. Not at all.
But I'm never going to do that shit. Why risk ruining the whole beer just to give it a little artificial, premature skunk?
Why would you want to skunk it? Why?
Yeah. Because I like a little bit of it in an old green bottle, but I could just go buy old Heineken to do that.
Exactly.
Or some Peroni. Get Peroni, a dusty Peroni from the back of the cooler at some mom and pop Italian restaurant.
That's exactly where you have to go.
Yeah.
I will say the best Guinness that I had here in the United States was an Irish pub in Las Vegas.
Okay.
The owner was Irish, and my wife and I was like, because this is it. I mean, this is exactly what do you do? And she's like, got to go through stock like crazy and got to clean your lines.
Clean your lines is the most important thing with Guinness, where people, if you take pride in your Guinness pours, you have to have clean lines. That's the number one thing where I've had Guinnesses that aren't good. It's always because of dirty draft lines. It's always
And therein lies the question that I would love to hear from the brewer's perspective, because obviously Unseen Creatures distributes beer. We just walked by a bunch of, kegs. And have you, from here, are there other breweries that you've worked at that have distributed?
Yeah. Every brewery I've worked at has done distro.
When it comes to distro, how difficult is it? How scary is it? How frustrating is it that somebody will go to a brew pub, or not a brew pub, that I'm gonna, sports bar.
Yeah.
This place like that. They've got your beer on tap, but this sports bar does not clean their lines very well. Somebody orders a pint of your beer through a dirty line that they don't know is dirty. They drink it. They hate it.
And they blame us.
They blame you.
I hate that. There's nothing you can do.
I was going to say, what can you do about it?
You could try to educate, the bars, but How many of them are going to be receptive to that? How many of them give a shit? We can't control, with the 3-tier system, we don't control where the beer goes. We give it to our distro partners, but then from there, they sell it to whoever they want.
So your beer that you've made here,
Yeah.
you have absolutely no idea where it's on draft.
No. And another thing, too, with cans, like I've gone to places when I worked at Tripping Animals that have cans of, smoothie sours sitting on warm shelves, and they have hazy IPAs sitting on warm shelves, where I'm like, man, this stuff we don't pasteurize or filter or any of this shit. Like, this is a living thing that we need to, it's going to be better if you keep it cold. These hazy IPAs turn to cardboard. You don't want them. It just accelerates that process.
Yeah. In my early years, I've had a few cans of mine explode because I purchased it off of a warm shelf at a store who shall not be named. And after I exploded the can, I spoke to the brewery, hey, just let you know this happened. It's like, was it in a fridge? No. It's like, look at the label. I was like, oh my gosh. So now I just, if I can't consume it, I have to put it in a fridge. And even then, it's not permanent.
Yeah.
But it's to this day, you can find stuff that should be in a fridge that is not in a fridge, and it will not take that much time and effort for that to actually be seen.
Because we can't, it's an impossible job to try to police everybody with that, unless you really want to control. It's just a lot of things to control. If you wanted to try to control that, you can't really go to every single bar that's serving your beer. I mean, I'm sure. It depends on how much you're distroing. I mean, I'm sure there's probably somebody who does that and controls like, yeah, you can't buy our beer until you fill out this application, and we have to approve of your bar. Like, you would have to do some like application process where you have to like check out the bar first before they're allowed to sell your product.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem like people would just go, all right, well, I just won't buy it. I'll buy something else.
And so right now, some beer nerd somewhere is giving you a 1-star rating on Untappd because the beer that was good was, improperly stored in the back of a hot truck for a couple weeks and then put through a dirty tap line, and you have you don't even know where it was.
It's like, oh, this 6-month-old IPA that's been sitting on a hot shelf tasted bad. Wow, that brewery sucks.
Yeah, that's.
But I mean, you get bad 1-star Untappd reviews like from people trying fresh, great stuff. So you can't please everybody. You can't really take that too personally. Even though I do anyway.
No, of course. I saw this. I went to one in Kansas City. There's one of the late night shows that does celebrities read mean tweets.
Yeah.
Bunch of breweries, like owners, brewers, reps, got together, went to a craft beer bar, and they did that with Untappd reviews.
With Untappd reviews, that's great.
It was hysterical because the entire room was full of people that could immediately smell the BS on each of those and understand, here's why this person that writing it is completely incorrect. Let's mock them.
I feel like 90% of Untappd reviews are grossly inaccurate, where it's just somebody who has no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But we've given, it's a platform for anybody. You don't have to be like a licensed, you don't have to be a journalist to be a critic. Like, you could just have download an app and you get to review everything.
And is that something that's difficult? Because Unseen Creatures, not saying this in a mean way, because it's definitely something that you've curated, but there's a lot of hype behind the name. A lot of people know the name. A lot of people know the quality. A lot of people will search out and purchase these beers from far and wide because they trust the name Unseen Creatures. Is there a certain amount of risk when you try to go that route, or you end up finding yourself in that route? As if you are the name that is known, some people are just going to be against you, either because they have no clue what's going on, or because, hey, I'm a bigger fan of Tripping Animals, I'm going to take these owl people down.
I mean, I feel like there's still a lot of people who haven't heard of us at all, where we are kind of, there are people that have heard of Unseen Creatures, but I don't feel like it's like I feel like there was a lot of hype when it opened, and it kind of trickled off during COVID. Like, it's not as much hype now as there was before, but we just, we're kind of have a fresh start with a new owner. So it's more just trying not to fuck it up and trying to kind of like get it going again,
for those
keep making good stuff that people will be able to continue justifying that hype.
Gotcha. And for people that don't know, obviously, Unseen Creatures was created by Marco.
Well,
I know he had a blog. He had a blog about the same time that I started my blog, and I really hated that blog because he was so much better at writing than I was.
I mean, he's a lawyer, so he's good at arguing. He's good at making a point. He's very convincing.
But obviously, he went the homebrewer route, decided to open up, and boom. How far into that process did you get involved?
With what?
With Unseen Creatures, and then become, the brewer.
Oh, like at the beginning?
Yeah, exactly.
Not that much. It was mostly Marco was the driving force, and Dan was the head brewer when they first opened. So I started here. I had been a cellarman at Wakefield before when Unseen first opened, and I came here as a bartender. I was helping out in the back, but since it had just opened, they didn't have like the payroll to hire another person. So it was just Dan in the back, and then I was just helping them out for free, basically under the impression that once they had the money to hire another person, I would be that person. I would be the assistant brewer or cellarman or whatever they wanted to call it, and I'd be helping him out. So I saw it as like a internship or something where I'm bartending and then helping out in the back, and then I'll get the job I want. And then COVID happened, and that kind of screwed everything up because that job, the carrot got further away.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So I ended up, there was a day where I was cleaning kegs for free. I was filling up Marco's car with kegs and driving them over to Tripping Animals to use their keg washer. And I overheard they were hiring a cellarman.
Oh.
Just accident, I just happened to be at the right place at the right time to overhear that. And I'm like, hello, I'm looking for a job. And they're like, you're at Unseen. And I'm like, yeah, like bartending and not doing what I want. And he can't offer me what I want. So I talked to Marco over lunch that day, and he gave me a glowing recommendation to them. He was very happy for me that I was able, because he knew I want a full-time production job. I don't want to bartend anymore. I'm over bartending. I want to be in the back. So I saw the opportunity and I jumped at it. And 2 weeks later, I started at Tripping. And then, I started there as a cellarman, but their head brewer had been alone for a year and a half and was just kind of completely sick of it. He was just burnt out, needed some time off, and I told him I wanted to brew, and he was like, oh, thank fuck. Oh, finally some help. So within a couple weeks, I was brewing, and then I did my second brew by myself, and he disappeared. He went to Ohio for 2 weeks.
Really?
So I got thrown to the wolves. I brewed 10 times by myself before he came back. And then pretty much since then, I was brewing everything there after that point where he was doing more head brewer stuff, making sure I have the ingredients and recipes and fixing things and, being the support. And then I would go in and brew, and we were a pretty good team.
Gotcha. And it's kind of funny that you mention the head brewer stuff, because I think most people just assume that if you're the head brewer or brewmaster, however it wants to be discussed, if you own it, that it's all just making beer all day long.
Yeah.
I'm going to paraphrase what you told me earlier, because I thought it was absolutely brilliant that you wanted to become a brewer to get away from the computer stuff. And here you are, you're doing all the computer stuff. You've got a staff behind us that's actually making beer, not only brewing the beers, but brewing it right now.
Yeah.
For the people that I guess aren't as familiar with it, in terms of a head brewer position, because it's not actually brewing as much as you would think
Not
it
always.
is.
It depends on the brewery too. There's some small breweries where the head brewer is the only brewer and the only person doing anything in there. But the bigger the brewery, I think the less actual brewing the head brewer does.
But what is it that they're actually doing?
Just
out of curiosity.
Everything there's a lot of things that need to be in order for the brewing to occur. We need to have ingredients. We need to have all these things. We schedule things. So we have to have the time, the ingredients, the water, just all the peripheral things to make the brew happen. I can't just be hey, let's brew. We need, what grain are we going to use? So we got to make a recipe, figure out what grain we're going to need, what hops we're going to need. I got to order that stuff. But then I also have to, look at the schedule. What are the next 4 or 5 beers? Because I need to order grain for 4 or 5 beers together and not just one beer at a time, because it's cheaper ordering it in bulk. So it's going over, making a brew schedule, seeing what's coming up, seeing what grains you're going to need, ordering all that stuff so that when it does come to the brew day. We just have everything there and we can brew. And these guys can do the work and brew without having to worry about if they're going to have the grain, if, what's on the schedule, whatever. They just show up and they have a recipe there and they have all the ingredients and they get to work.
So for today, how far into the future do you know what's happening? How far into the future? These are the recipes we're going to make. Here's the ingredients that we already have ordered. Here's the point at which time we need to figure out the next.
Typically, I like having my brew schedule for 2 months ahead, so that I can kind of, see what's coming up and know when I need to order what. And it's also not scheduling so far in advance that I need to make a ton of changes when something gets messed up. Because there are I like having the brew schedule, but it also kind of needs to be fluid, because at the end of the day, beer's a living thing, and it goes at its own pace. It's not always as predictable as you want it to be, or as it always is, because you can make the same beer that's, it's taken me 13 days the last 5 times, but for some reason now it's taken longer or shorter. I like to give a little bit of cushion for improvisation where you need to fix stuff or something goes wrong or you have problems with glycol. There's always, if nothing ever went wrong, a monkey could brew. It's not a super hard process. It's when shit gets fucked up that you have to troubleshoot things and figure out, oh, great, I got to rebuild a pump. But if I don't do that in the next, hour, the beer's going to be affected. So I got to figure out how to use the other pump and tie it in while I fix this pump, and just little weird stuff like that, where it's just troubleshooting things and making stuff work.
My other question I've always been curious about this is what happens when you brew a beer and it has absolutely nowhere to go? It's got nowhere to go. There's no cans. There's no kegs.
You gotta wait. That happens too. That's that's part of the head brewer stuff, is anticipating, if you're filling tanks, those same tanks also need to be emptied. So in addition to making sure you have kegs or cans or whatever sort of package that the beer is going to go into, you need cooler space for that. If you order cans, you need to make sure you also order lids and case trays and labels. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a pallet of cans and not had any lids for them, and I'm like, this is useless. Just little shit like that there's a lot of moving parts. And I think the head brewer is more like a director, like the manager of it, to make sure all the moving parts are working together, versus actually in there pulling levers every day, which is something I do that we have to do because there's just physically not enough people. So we have to get back there and get dirty a lot. And I like being back there. I help mash in this morning. I help, I do as much as I can. And there's days where we'll have double brews, so I'll come in and get the first half started, so then the guys don't have to be here for 12 hours. They can come in later and have a normal day.
And so you came in, Marco was still the owner.
Yeah.
You start brewing here. With Unseen Creatures, how many of the beers are legacy beers that people, you've got regulars, they're used to? This needs to be on tap, like Artifact. That has to be.
Yeah.
It will be here whenever I go. I have to make sure that it is.
Yeah, we try to keep it on draft. The fooder stuff's a little easier because we have a fooder full of it just sitting there. If I need to top off the fooder and fill it up, I only need to leave it like a few weeks. So I'll pull off a bunch of kegs first, then I'll fill it up. So I was telling you before, we do like a Solera method where we never fully empty the fooders. So they're like 22 barrels or so. So we have a 7-barrel brew house, so it's 3 brews to keep them full. So when I see it get about a third lower, I'll top it off. I'll get whatever kegs we need for the next month and then top it off, because it takes about 3 weeks to a month for it to be ready to drink again once I add more wort.
But the recipe is pretty well cut and dry. It's something.
Yeah, the recipe is super, super simple. Very easy recipe. It's all the culture. It's the little unseen creatures inside the fooder that give it the terroir, that give it the flavor you can't replicate anywhere else, because it's done here with the previous owner's culture from when he was a home brewer.
Gotcha.
It's his wild culture. It's his, it's the culture that's been here since it's opened. He had it as a home brewer before that. He selectively created it over years and years. So there's not really any way I mean, we can go save a sample of it. They have like labs and banks where we can like kind of freeze some away in case, one of the fooders gets infected and we have to dump it and we want to redo it again.
So, but obviously that's not the only beers that you have. You've got
so we have some flagship beers that do, like the Child was one of the first beers we did here. That's now like our flagship IPA. We have a lot of reoccurring beers from before.
Gotcha. But you also have a lot of new beers, one-offs, completely different beers in the before time. Where did a lot of those ideas come from? Was it something that you were allowed to bring in beforehand, or was it something that ownership said, here's my idea, brew my idea?
A lot of that came from Marco in the beginning stages, where he'd be like, he'd have the idea or a concept already and be like, yeah, we have the beer like Irony in a Blue Sky. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but it was like offhand comment about the weather, and he's like, oh, I like that. Irony in a Blue Sky. We'll call that a beer.
But now you've got new ownership.
Yeah.
And how involved are they in the beer process? How much of it is, hey, let's do this? And then how much of it is go?
I feel like it's been pretty collaborative with the new owners. They've taken over. It's like, I'd say probably the last 6 months. So pretty much me coming back here was a couple months before Dan left. And then when Dan left, I took over as head brewer. But it was like a month before I took over as head brewer that Marco was out completely.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, I came back not expecting, I thought I was going to be working for Marco. I've known Marco for years. I love working with Marco. He's like a creative guy. He's a nervous guy. He's funny. I get along with him. So him leaving kind of was a curveball for me because I felt like I had a good rapport with him. I didn't really want him to leave. But then, the new owner's here a lot. And
who is the new owner?
It's Joaquin. This guy Joaquin, who's Argentinian. He's a cool dude. He's very young, very new to the industry. So he's really relying on me a lot to make sure shit works. And he's put a lot of trust in me and given me a lot of freedom to make decisions. And is kind of, he has, approval on a lot of things, but he, lets me, I don't know, do my own shit.
Well, I was going to say, how much does he allow you to do? How many beers are you just like, I've had this idea, now I can just
We've had a lot of waiting. Like my brew schedule's all messed up right now because we've had glycol problems. So I'm kind of taking it one day at a time, right? I have a lot of ideas for stuff I want to do, but because we're limited on space, my priority right now is just meeting distro demands and doing, stuff that sells because I can't really fill up all the tanks right now. So since we're only doing a few beers at a time, till we get the new glycol chiller, it's more based on necessity.
Okay.
We have a Keller. We have a brand new Keller beer in one of the tanks.
Ooh.
That was my idea.
Nice.
That I want to do a Keller. I like an unfinished lager because I like them. I want to drink it, and because it's easy, it's less turnaround time. I'm not gonna lie, it's like a lager we could turn out quicker. I want to see how it does. Like if it does well, like that's cool. We could do it again. But if not, if nobody likes it, then it's a one-off, and it doesn't. It goes either way. I
guess I would love to hear about some of the things that you're really looking forward to doing, but I kind of want to step back a little bit and give everybody kind of an idea for what Unseen Creatures was traditionally known for. What are the beers that are usually made? Because I will say it's interesting because it's Unseen Creatures brewing and blending.
Yeah.
And while there's a number of breweries that will blend, they don't have it nearly as front and center in the name as Unseen Creatures is. I mean, I know that there's other breweries here in South Florida that do that. Obviously, Odd Breed comes to mind first.
Yeah.
The brewing part and the blending part kind of describe how those two work well together within Unseen Creatures.
So originally this place was open as a brew pub. There was no intent to do distro. Distro came out of necessity during COVID. So wild beers aren't like like a high selling, very popular style. Even in areas with a very like educated craft beer populace, they still struggle a little bit where you have even California and Texas, where you have these like staple breweries like Jester King even, had to diversify and make IPAs. You have breweries like Black Project, like really cool, doing great stuff that end up going out of business because it's like I said, even in areas with very educated beer clientele, they still have problems if you're only focused on wild beers. If that's the only thing you have, it's not that you're a one-trick pony. Wild beers are very hard to do well, and they're very complex. But I don't think people are ready for that. Like, where, as long as 60% of all craft beer is hazy IPAs.
Exactly.
So,
even though
you're limiting yourself by only focusing on a niche like that.
Mm-hmm.
So Marco always made good hazy IPAs. And then during COVID, they really started taking off here out of necessity through distro. So I've noticed too that like I could brew whatever IPA and it sells out right away. Like distro will buy it, no questions asked. That smoked mild there, nobody wants that.
Yeah, I was going to say, because one of the things that is a Wolfpack of One, correct?
Yeah, Wolfpack of One.
I tried a few days ago at the North Miami Brew Fest.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it, but it is a Rauch beer.
Yeah.
And Rauch beers don't sell anywhere.
It's barely a Rauch beer. It's an English style beer that we added some smoked malt to. So it's not like I know some Rauch beers get like 40, 50, 60% smoked malt, like crazy, a shit ton of smoked malt.
Licking
and you have like
barbecue.
Brozovich that are 100% smoked wheat and really smoky beers. This is less than 10%. It's just a little like chef's kiss of smoked malt, just because I like it.
Yeah, exactly. But it is noticeable, and it's
yeah.
I would almost say it's the right amount.
Thank you.
Anything less would be barely noticeable and just not worth the time and effort. Anything more, and why did I smoke a 6-pack of cigars before I drink this beer?
There's definitely a line with smoke where it can easily be too much. It's very easy to do too much smoke. It's off-putting for a lot of people, even a little bit of smoke. They're just not used to that flavor being in a beer.
No, that makes sense.
Where people love smoked stuff. They love barbecue.
Absolutely, yeah. And you would assume that this would be a natural beer for like a barbecue joint or something.
But it's still a little weird for people. But I feel like, I feel like beers like this are going to help turn people on to smoke more. Where it is a approachable level of smoke. It's not overly smoky. It does a lot to complement the beer versus like overpowering anything.
And what's interesting is that pairing it with an English mild, putting it in an English mild. English mild tends to have sort of a tea-like fruitiness to it, not overly, not like you're throwing a ton of El Dorado and lemon drop in there. But there's just enough of like the muted lemon zesty that you put in an Earl Grey sort of a fruitiness. And I think with that, the touch of smoke really sort of makes it pop. And it's a fantastic beer. And I'll go ahead and just drink basically a keg of this all day if I could. What are the other kinds of things that you would love to do here at Unseen Creatures that maybe Miami-Dade isn't necessarily ready for just yet, but you definitely think that it could be?
Yeah, I want to do more smoked stuff for sure. I have an idea for a smoked IPA that I want to do like a smoked hazy IPA with some pineapple, add some fruit to it, which I think pineapple helps people like associate the smoke a little better because it's something something that's not like a normal smoked thing, but can be, people throw it on the grill. It's something we're used to it with the smoke. Like our palates are already accepting of pineapple and smoke together. So I feel like doing like a pineapple IPA that's smoked is a little more approachable. It makes the smoke a little more approachable for people to like kind of wrap their head around.
No, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. I was trying to find a different kind of beer that I ate. Oh, I think I know.
Yeah, do something weird like that where I haven't seen anybody do a smoked IPA.
I don't think I've ever. I've never. Usually if they're doing anything smoke, they will hold back.
And they'll keep it super traditional or do like some dark German style. But yeah, that beer, I've been trying to do a smoked IPA for like a year, a year and a half at different breweries, and nobody lets me. Everybody's like, "That's a stupid idea. That's a stupid idea."
But why?
But like, how do you know until you try it?
Exactly. And
you don't know unless you try.
Well,
But it is a big gamble because it's like thousands of dollars worth of ingredients. But it's still an IPA. I feel like people, at least if it doesn't, I think the novelty of it will help it at least move.
What hops would you do with something like that? Because obviously, I would
it's
assume
something like El Dorado or something very pineapple forward. Mm-hmm. Something.
Obviously, not Citra, because Citra is overdone.
Yeah,
and I think something like Cashmere.
The reason, all right, Citra's overdone because it's good.
Well,
that's it. Like if people stopped giving Citra IPAs the highest reviews on Untapped, people wouldn't use as much Citra.
That's a good point.
But there's so many beers that people, like, man, one of the highest rated IPAs, the best selling IPAs is Parish, the Ghost in the Machine. That's all Citra. People love Citra. And that's the thing too. I try to get away and use more hops, but all the best received IPAs we do have fucking Citra or fucking Mosaic.
I will say it's interesting because the next facility over in the strip mall is, what do they do? I guess they do electronics for
Cartel Baggers they do like electronics. It looks like a chop shop, but they just add like electronics and like tints.
So there's some interesting looking vehicles coming behind us, which is amazing.
Yeah, they did a big tricycle for the shack there.
Really?
It was like this. It looked like a Giants vehicle. I guess it was because it was Shaq's, but it was a giant tricycle that you look at. You're like, I don't even know how I would climb on that thing.
He probably had to duck to get it.
Yeah,
which is amazing. Yeah, it's interesting to see how some hops are kind of coming and going. I've noticed Cashmere is really it's really becoming
Cashmere
a go-to.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing, like. Hazy IPAs in general, like people complain like that, like, oh, you guys have 9 hazy IPAs on draft, which was how it was when I first started here. But it's like, yo, stop buying them and we'll stop making them. People would complain about them, but it's like, bro, every brewery is selling hazy IPAs. Like, everyone's buying them. Like,
and I was going to say, how much of it is market?
It's all market driven. I don't know any brewers that want to drink that many hazy IPAs. It's all to keep the lights on. We brew what sells.
It's funny, and it's funny that you mentioned that. I feel like a simple 3.5 table saison is really what most the breweries will.
Oh, what up?
Hey, that's what the most brewers will drink if they're drinking anything at all. Usually it's coffee, but
or a smoked mild.
There you go.
Yeah, that's like definitely a beer that is playing to brewers, because I get more brewers telling me they like that beer than anyone else. I get brewers. I've had a bunch of brewers reach out to me, like, hit me up, DM, like, slide in my DMs on Instagram to mention that they like this random beer that they tried at a bar in Orlando or something. And I'm like, man, that's awesome. Like, that's better than Untapped reviews to me.
Yeah, I was going to say industry would be.
Yeah, getting recognition from peers is awesome.
No, absolutely.
But then I'll have like brewers tell me that's their favorite beer, and then I look on Untapped and some guy gave it 2 stars because smoke doesn't belong in beer. You're just like, well, you don't belong on Untapped.
I kind of feel like I'm starting to feel like there should be an Untapped for brewers.
Yeah. It would just be like Miller High Life 5 stars.
It's amazing. For the beer snobs, they turn their noses up at basically every single beer that you mentioned, enjoying the slight funk to that you.
Well, brewers like Miller High Life because you don't have to think about it. Because it's a beer where there's no analysis needed. You don't need to, oh, what hops are in this? I wonder, like, what did they carb this to? What adjuncts? How much? What did they use? Any corn? Like, you just like put it back. You just drink it. It's a beer you don't have to think about. It doesn't take any brain power. You're just like, cold fizzy water, good.
Just drink it. Just drink it.
It's just a beer you don't. And after a day of dealing with, trying beers and analyzing beers and thinking about beer, it's nice to just have a fucking beer you don't have to give a shit about.
You know, it was funny. A long time ago, I spoke to a brewery that was in Clearwater. They are no longer with us, unfortunately, but the owners used to work for Anheuser-Busch, and I asked them point blank, what kind of beers do the Anheuser-Busch brewers brew when they are at home? And they said absolutely nothing. They all make wine.
Yeah.
Because they make beer. Like, that's their job.
Beer. Or start distilling.
So this is, like I said, part one. Our next episode, our first episode in 2023, will be part two. And we're going to talk about some awesome beers that he's been doing, including a collaboration that he sort of headed up to help out victims of Hurricane Ian on the west coast of Florida, especially Lee and Collier counties. Come back next week. You'll hear the rest of the interview. You'll hear some great information that you'll be able to take with you down to Miami-Dade when you go visit the team at Unseen Creatures, which I definitely recommend you do. In the meantime, thank you for listening. We hope you had a great 2022. We know we did here at the Florida Beer Podcast, and we appreciate you being here. Our intro announcer is Jeff Brozovich. Field producer is Steve Pekala. Executive producer and Grand High Poobah of the Florida Podcast Network is Jemmy Legagneur. This is Dave, your host and author. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next year. Drink Florida Craft.